I'm excited to be interviewing Dr. Crystal Hearn. And let's start with your educational background, Crystal.
Yeah, so I kind of had a weird path. Getting a degree in biology was not my first choice when I was in high school and college. So I actually have a bachelor's degree in math. My original intention was to be a math teacher. And then I discovered genetics and biology, and so I pursued a PhD in biomedical science.
Great. And so, in pursuing that PhD in biomedical science, did you have an idea that you wanted to stay in academia, become a researcher, or did you always know you wanted to do something else?
Yeah, so I definitely thought I was going to be a scientist. Once I discovered, lab work and everything, I just thought it was just fascinating. And as I was going through my PhD, kind of the past couple of years, I was starting to find that I loved the science, but I didn't think that I wanted to do bench work. Just something was missing for me from that. And so it became a matter of just exploring what else might be out there. As you were saying earlier, like you, I didn't get exposed to a whole lot of other options. And so it was really became this journey of just searching for what are the other possibilities.
Hmm. And then now you run your own business as a medical writer and editor. And I want us to talk a little bit about the story about how you got there, right? Because you went from thinking that well, first of all, you wanted to be a math teacher and that changed. You wanted to be a scientist and that changed. How did you find this path?
Yeah, so it was a bit of a jungle gym, I like to say, because it wasn't a very linear path.
Mhm.
And I think that that happens, well, for a lot of medical writers, but for a lot of people in general, as we discover more about what's out there and discover more about ourselves.
Mhm.
So for me, my first step out of graduate school, I thought, well, I like the science, but I don't really want to do bench work. Let me go into clinical research. So I worked in clinical research for a few years, really in a bunch of different roles, just exploring what the possibilities were. And in those different roles, it was great because I got to learn all about clinical research and study design and, IRB and all of those pieces as well, because my degree was in basic science and working with cells. But while I was in those various roles, I did a lot of writing. Almost, I don't want to say it was by accident, but what kind of happened was someone came to me and said, "Hey, read this paper that we're writing just so you know the kind of things that we're doing." And I had a really hard time understanding it. And so I took a risk and asked if I could edit it. And then that went well. And then people kept coming to me for it. And so I started to realize, like, oh, maybe I have a knack for this. I definitely, of all the things I'm doing, I enjoy this most. And so then I pursued a full-time career working with words. So I was so fortunate that I found a job at a research organization in the Bay Area. And so I was a scientific editor for them for several years. And it was an amazing place to work, an amazing opportunity, but I still felt that something was missing. And I felt that I could do more because there I was an editor, so I was a service. And so that's really helpful for scientists, but I wanted to be able to help them in a much bigger, longer term way. And I've wanted to teach and have been teaching in some capacity since high school. Actually, I originally went to college to be a teacher, a math teacher. And so I wanted to teach, and it wasn't an opportunity that I was going to be able to have there. And I wanted to be able to help people. My philosophy is to be of service. And so I thought if I can't do it here, where else can I do it? And so I started looking for opportunities that might be available and I couldn't find one. And so my thought was, well, if it doesn't exist, create it. And so that's what I did.
Hmm. Creating your own game. So I'm a very passionate advocate for creating your own game because I was I sent a newsletter out to my to the people on my email list, a whole bunch of academics and PhD students and postdocs, and I heard a story that I shared with them in the newsletter today, and it was about Matt Damon, the actor, and he had been looking for leading roles in movies since the late 1980s. But it wasn't until him and his friend, his childhood friend, Ben Affleck, wrote Good Will Hunting, and they put themselves in those movies as the stars of the movies, that Matt Damon became a household name. And so, I really identified with that, because I was like, wow, my journey to becoming a science writer also didn't start with somebody hiring me. It started with me creating my own thing. And so I agree with you when you say go and create your own thing. So I was looking at your LinkedIn, and you've been doing this for about 7 years now. Yeah.
Yes, just celebrated my 7 year anniversary.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. It's very
Congratulations.
exciting.
A lot of businesses, there's a statistic out there that says a lot of businesses fail within the first 5 years or something like that. What do you think you've done to help you continue to be successful, a successful science, medical writer, communications business owner?
Oh, that's a loaded question. Um, yeah, so it's there's a lot of answers there. I wouldn't say it's one thing.
Right.
Um, it's I do think that your approach makes a big difference. So, for example, I hear people will call themselves freelancers, which is, I mean, fantastic. But to me, I don't consider myself a freelancer. I consider myself a consultant, an independent business owner, an advisor. And I think that the mindset is a little bit different. And I can't speak for everyone, but I have noticed that sometimes when people are freelancers, they are the makers versus the managers. And so there's a little bit of a different skill set. And so I think my, curiosity and eagerness to always learn about different aspects has helped me a lot. As far as the business standpoint, running a business, all the different pieces that go into it. As far as what's been the key to my success, ooh, I think that's part of it. I think the other thing is that one of the most important things as a business owner, especially as an editor, is really cultivating relationships with your clients. So I'm an editor more than I am a writer. And so as an editor, you're not necessarily just a service, but you're diving into someone's draft. They put a lot of time and energy and effort into this draft, and you're going in with a red pen and marking all the things that they should be different. I like to call them editing suggestions to consider. Um, but that's hard, right? Some people can receive that as criticism. And so being able to manage that dynamic in a way that is kind and encouraging, I think makes a really big difference. I think that that relationship is really key.
Hmm. So you said a few things, and I think that one of the things I liked about this is changing. I had actually seen an argument about this online, where people talked about calling themselves freelancers versus consultants, and there were people that were saying it doesn't matter what you call yourself as long as you are, you know, doing your work and getting your money in. And but then I could see both sides, because perception is everything. We don't like to admit it sometimes, but I believe that perception is everything, right? And sometimes, at least from my standpoint, when I used to call myself a freelancer, it was like, oh, just like you're just like everybody else. You're just like a commodity, right? That was how it looked like to me back then. But the moment I changed that to calling myself a bioscience writer without the freelancer in there, all of a sudden I was attracting all these people, right? And so perception can be everything. And so making that switch from calling yourself a freelancer to consultant, I think that that's so, so good. And then it seems like you're very customer client centric.
I am, yes. And so this is a little bit of a balance between that freelance versus consultant. And it was a mind shift for me as well.
Yeah.
Um, So when I first started out, I considered myself a service and I do what the client wants.
Right.
And then as I started to master my craft and become an expert, I don't know that I want to call myself that, but developed my expertise, let's go with that. Um, that I realized that what they thought they needed was not in their best interest and that there was a better way. And so when I realized that, my goal then was not to just do what they wanted, but to help them be the best that they could be. And that meant shifting my own mindset to thinking, I am not just doing what they're asking of me, I am guiding them and advising them on what they can do better than what they thought they needed.
Every other Friday, I send out an email newsletter to about 3,000 PhDs and academics on tips, tools, and resources that you can use to build a career you love. And I'm inviting you to join us. You can go to theboldphd.com/careers list. Again, that's theboldphd.com/careers list. Let's get back into the episode. So, so good. So, so good. What kinds of projects do you work on?
So I mostly work on manuscripts and grant proposals. I dabble in a few other documents, but those are my bread and butter, as I would say.
Mhm. So then are your clients mostly in academia?
Yeah, most of them are in academia. There are a few industry, but most of them are within academia.
Hmm. That's really good. A question I'm always asking is how do you find them?
Yeah. And I will say that this has been true with many of the other writers and editors that I've met. Most come through referrals.
Hmm.
Yeah. So which is great.
Which is great. So referrals as in people that have worked with you before, enjoyed
Yeah.
your work, and then they tell their colleagues about you.
Yes.
Okay, okay. That's really good. But then, like traveling back to when you started. So now you're 7 years into it. So I can see how that machine, you already have the machine going. But like if we take a few steps back, I know you had worked in some in clinical research and some in-house roles. Do you think that those initial full-time, traditional work roles helped with your initial like lift?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, definitely. And I think that would be true for a lot of people. Oh, how?
Mhm.
So I mean, when I decided to branch off on my own, one of the first things I did was let everybody know that that's what I was going to do. I'm gonna say a benefit for me in that situation, not so much for other people, and I'll elaborate on that in a moment. Um, was that many universities and research organizations don't offer training in how to write. They don't offer editing services, and so people need to seek that externally. If I was referred to people who didn't have access to those services, like there was at the institution I was working at, then that was helpful for me. So, one of the first things I did when I branched off was let everybody I knew know that I was starting this process. And it was slow. It was my first couple of years, the first 2 years in starting a business tend to be the most challenging, and that's regardless of the type of business. And that was probably true for me too. So it was definitely a lot of upfront work and getting established and getting the clientele to get past that
Yeah.
mark.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And this is where I'm gonna insert my one of a thought that I've been having since I've been having these conversations with so many people that also have their businesses, is that I find that for so many people, having that initial work experience or sometimes being part of um industry trade organizations, right, where people know you ends up being helpful if you want to start a business because then you have contacts that who know you in person and they're sort of warm leads that you can reach out to, right?
Yes, yes. And I mean, with almost any career path that you choose, that people will tell you like network, and it's the people that you know. And I think that's true really across the board.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you know, have been both a writer and an editor. For somebody that's watching this that's new to those terms, like they hear sometimes people hear, "Oh, I want to be a medical writer, I'm an editor," and they think it's the same thing. What is the delineation between the two?
Ooh. Well, it also it's not black and white. It really depends on how a person defines themselves. They could technically do both. I know a lot of people who do. Um, the distinction for me is that the writer is looking, well, in the scientific medical realm, they're digging in the literature, finding the information, building something from scratch. Um, Whereas for me, I really enjoy the editing part because it's that next level critical thinking, not just what information is in here, but how is the reader going to receive that information? And so I like jumping in and basically being an advocate for readers and looking at, word choice and sentence structure and meaning and all these different pieces, and trying to bring together what the author intends with what the reader needs to receive. Um, and so I think that sort of deep dive, really critical thinking is just a little bit of a different skill set, and people can definitely have both, but it's like channeling a different part of your brain, I think.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I primarily write and edit my own work, but I wouldn't call myself an editor. So, I mean, there is a distinction, but you're right. The lines are a little blurred in there. The next question I wanted to ask you was about, how you've trained yourself in professional development. So you weren't classically trained as a writer. I wasn't either, or an editor. So what do you do for your own education to like keep up with, for instance, I remember one of the books, I don't know if it's even on my desk, but I had this book that where I would think it's by E.B. White. Yeah, yeah, it's been very, very helpful for me. So what resources would you say have been helpful for you as you've developed, and how do you tackle ongoing professional development?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of things that I've done. But as one benefit to being a PhD is that you are trained in how to learn and how to think.
Mhm.
And so in the beginning, especially, I did a lot of independent study. So I was looking at, the elements of style and a lot of the classic books. Um, I will say that the book that, or the initial book that was kind of the jumping point for me in my own style of editing, is How to Write Science in Plain English by Anne E. Green, which is a great book for anyone who wants to learn how to write well. It's a shorter book, and it gets into, it has some higher level things and some lower level. Sorry, I'm getting excited and I go off on tangents. But
That's
basically,
all
I've
right.
read both books on scientific medical writing and also on the fundamentals, because what has happened, what I've noticed is that scientific writing, medical writing, academic writing are kind of their own dialect, that is a different style than some of the fundamentals. And I would argue that that's actually a huge disservice to readers. And so, kind of one thing that I advocate for and is my personal style is to strip a lot of that away to get down to the fundamentals, to make it a lot easier on the reader. So, it's important to me to also look at some of these fundamental books, style guides as well. But I don't just read them for information. I think really critically about, well, this person said this and this person said this, and this research has done this, and what do I think? And so really analyzing, critiquing everything to figure out what's going to be the best way to do it. So a lot of it has been independent study, and then also joining a professional organization, and going to conferences and attending the different educational opportunities that they have, taking courses, those kinds of things are also really helpful.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing that. So you have an ELS, which is I think it's a certification from the American Medical Writers Association, correct?
It's from the Board of Editors in the Life Sciences.
Board of Editors in the Life Sciences. Would
Yes.
you say, so because we're talking about professional development and learning, would you say that gaining a certification has been helpful to your career?
Yes. Yes, I think it would be helpful for anyone, especially if you are coming from science and into a writing field. Working up to getting a certification will show other people that you have qualifications to do that. With the ELS certificate, you have to be working in the field for a couple of years. So there are some kind of nuances in some of these things. But that can definitely help people see that you have that expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. So, because the reason I asked you that question is because I've also gotten a lot of questions around, hey, especially for newer writers who are trying to break into the field, do you think a certification is going to help me? And my question has I've always had mixed feelings because I don't have any certification, so I can't really speak on that. But I've been in the field for going on 7 years, first as a freelancer and then in-house. But then I agree with you that first of all, it's a way to challenge yourself, right? Like we can never,
Mhm.
education is something nobody can ever take away from you. So it's a way to challenge yourself. Also, if you're really new to this field, then I find that some of those certifications can lay a foundation, groundwork for you to build upon. And then last but not least, of course, it shows other people that you have some credentials in this area to move forward. But like you said, a lot of these certifications also require that you've worked in the field a little bit. So if a newer person came to you and asked you that question, Crystal, what would you tell them?
I would say, I mean, a certification is not required, just like a degree is not required. Um, but your strategy will need to be a little bit different. So, someone can look at my name and the letters after my name, and it's a signal to them that, oh, she has a doctorate and she has this certification. And someone who doesn't have those will have to show that in a different way.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just being mindful of that piece of it. And if someone asks you, oh, how come, you don't have these, or what are your goals, to just be prepared to talk about that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That is so so good. I loved your something you said earlier about getting to medical communications not being a linear path, right? I like that because as you can tell, I like to like go into stories and frameworks and how people think. How should people be thinking about that as they try to get into this? Because there are people that are like, oh, I'm finishing my PhD and I really want to get into the medical writer job, but nobody is saying yes to me. And sometimes I've told people, I think you should still apply for these jobs, but maybe I'm looking at your resume right now and maybe you need experience in this area first. Let's talk a lot. Let's talk about. I know it's not a question I sent you to prepare for, but
That's okay.
let's talk about that a little bit. What is your take on that? Careers not being linear and the advantages of that.
Yes. I mean, I would say a lot of people, well, I shouldn't generalize too much, but I do think it applies to other fields. But of the medical writers that I've met, all have different paths. Some come from, PhD programs, some are MDs, some are nurses, some are literature, it's across the board. And so I don't think there's, sort of this one set linear path. I do think that a benefit to the jungle gym, as I like to call it, there's a couple of benefits. One is, especially if you were like me and like you, where you're getting your doctorate and you're on this one track to do a postdoc and start your own lab, and that's the one path you do. if you're not exposed to other options and if you don't try other options to see whether you like them or not, if they're a good fit for you, it's hard to know if you're on the right path. So I think that trying out things is a great way to see what's going to align with you, what's going to, bring you joy and purpose in what you're doing, and then you pick up skills along the way. So for me, I no longer work in clinical research in the same capacity that I did. But when I was in those roles, I learned about how to design studies, different types of studies, how the IRB process works, how to write materials for patients in trials. So I learned a lot of skills that are really helpful for me now. So I think in seeing some of these things as opportunities, not necessarily to advance, but to build your skills to get you in the direction that you want to go and try some things out to see what fits for you, I think would be kind of the way that I would frame it.
Yeah. I agree with you. And you end up being, I find that you end up being definitely more creative because you've had those experiences, right? So, for instance, if you've had academic experiences, but you've also had experiences within clinical research, which was really different or is really different from lab science, right? So, being a lab scientist is very different from doing clinical research. And then you move, you learn all the protocols and all the terminology in that area. I find that it helps you become more like a really good shapeshifter because you can toggle between tabs because you've had all those experiences. So I find that it makes you richer, and I think that that's exactly what you're saying.
Yes, I like how you use the word rich.
Yeah.
Yes. I think it's also what makes us unique and gives us a unique skill set among other people who do the same thing that we do. I my very first job out of graduate school, I was working on discharge instructions for patients. And the curse of knowledge was at play. And I didn't, I made a lot of assumptions as I was writing these things and as I was learning, oh, wait, someone who has, doesn't have a college education, who has this certain state of mind when they're getting these instructions, they're not going to understand, what this means. And it was really eye-opening for me to really consider who the reader is, who the person on the other end is. And I've brought that to what I do now. And it's a really big part of what I do now. So just that short little job that I had made a big difference in my philosophy as an editor. And I think that that happens with everyone. And that's what gives you kind of what do they call it? Your unique value proposition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So good. What do you think are some of the biggest opportunities or maybe and also biggest challenges in this field right now?
Ooh. The biggest, okay, I'm going to say an opportunity and a challenge would be, of course, AI.
Mhm.
It's rapidly evolving. The tools can be really valuable, but they can also create different challenges than we had before. So I think, keeping tabs on what's happening there, as things evolve is really important. Um, Let's see, what would be other challenges? I mean, one thing is I believe there will always be a need for a human on the other end. For that emotional connection, that really considering who the reader is.
Yeah.
So I would say a challenge. I don't know if it's a challenge. I'm challenge driven because I see challenges as opportunities,
Yeah.
right? So I think that's why I'm kind of struggling to come up with a
Yeah.
challenge.
But I think you can state it as either or, right? Like I like how you stated AI as both a challenge and as an opportunity, right? It's an opportunity because some of the more mundane tasks can be outsourced to that, but then it's a challenge because there's also issues of copyright infringement and plagiarism, right? But and so you can say that as both, and that's fine. I think in a similar way to you.
Okay. Oh, good.
I really have enjoyed this conversation with you, and it's our time is slowly coming to an end. But for somebody that maybe they're thinking of, getting into what you're a successful business owner, you've done this for multiple years. And with running your own business, of course, comes challenges and opportunities. What would you say to that person that wants to do something similar to you and own their own business? They're a scientist and they want to own their own business in this space. What would you tell them?
So if they're a scientist, I would say
Or not, you
no,
know.
no, it's okay. I'm just thinking of what skills would that person have.
Mhm.
So I would say if they don't already have some kind of exposure training to writing opportunities or to writing courses, would be to take a course. Um, Not only will it hone your skills, but it will also give you a little bit more insight into, well, do I really enjoy working with words? Do I like this process? And the benefit of doing that is no matter what career path you choose, having good communication skills will help you. So even if you decide after that, writing's not for me, you will have just developed skills that you can apply to any job that you have. So I would advise that, well, really for anyone, but especially if you're considering a role like this. As far as if someone is wanting to start a business from scratch within this field, I would highly recommend joining a professional organization. Of course, I'm going to mention the American Medical Writers Association. I will admit that my first couple of years, I tried to do everything on my own, trying to learn about how to start a business and what the state required and the bookkeeping and all these different things, all on my own. And then about 2 years in, I discovered AMWA really by accident because I was taking the Bells exam actually, and they had it at an AMWA conference. I was like, well, I'm going to be there. I might as well go. One of the best decisions I've ever made. Um, but they have an incredible amount of resources to help people, to know about different business strategies you need to consider and everything. But even more than that, the members, the community is one of the most warm, welcoming, supportive communities I've ever known. And I learned so much from all the people there about things that I could have done differently in the beginning that maybe wouldn't have taken me 2 years. I probably could have done it in less time, and had that support along the way. So I would say take a course and join a professional organization.
And speaking of courses, which ones would you recommend? And if you have any book recommendations as well, provide those.
Oh, so many. Um, okay, so for courses, um, let me see. I would say that if you are looking for a certificate, a well-known course in writing, there's the one at University of Chicago. There's also one, I believe, UC San Diego Extension, and
Mhm.
then another one at UC Berkeley. So those are very well-known ones if you're looking for, a certificate from a university. If you're looking for something else, not that I want to put in a personal plug, but I do offer a course as well. It's a little bit of a different take. I mentioned earlier about how I advocate for not writing academically to really simplify things. And so my course is just really based on that aspect. Um, but I would say the best starting point would probably be one of those three from universities because that will also be a great thing that you can list on your resume.
Right, right. And maybe a book recommendation. You already gave one with Anne E. Green, How to Write Science in Plain Language. What else? What other book would you recommend?
Um, that would definitely be my top one. Science related or not science related?
Any.
Oh man, I have to pick only one. Um,
You don't have to pick one. You can also give us like the top two or three that come to mind.
okay. So I'll do two scientific and two general. How about that? So
Yes.
one was the one by Annie Green. The other one is Writing Science by Joshua Shamel. He does a great job on the storytelling aspect that I really appreciate, kind of the bigger picture. And then non-scientific, I would say, of course, the elements of style, really getting down to
Yeah.
the basics.
Mm.
And oh my goodness, I only get to pick. Um, oh my. I'm going to say On Writing Well.
Yes, I was gonna say on writing well too. I
Yeah.
almost, yeah, that's a really good one too. Yeah,
Yeah.
on
And
writing
I'm
well.
going to throw in one more only because medical writing is such a vast field.
Yeah.
There's so many different branches that you can go into, whether it's manuscripts or grants or regulatory or writing for the public. There's just so many different things. So if someone was looking for a great book to kind of expose you to all the different areas and the different options that you might want to explore, oh, now I'm forgetting the name of the book, but I have it right here. Hang on. It's The Chicago Guide to Communicating Science.
Mm,
Also a great book that kind of talks about all these different things and might be able to give you a little bit of a sense of what you might want to do.
mhm. Well, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I learned a lot, and I hope our listeners did as well. Thank you, Crystal.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It was a pleasure to talk with you.
Absolutely. All the book recommendations that the guests on this podcast provide, I have curated them at theboldphd.com/bookrecs. That's BOOKRECS, book recs, like book recommendations, right? So you can go to theboldphd.com/book recs to find those books. Full disclosure, I am an Amazon affiliate. So if you click on a book and you purchase it, I might get a small commission for referring you.